Hello, I am Stefan Kant, Chief Curator at the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden, and it is my privilege to welcome you today. This installment of talking to our time, with artist Aliza Nisenbaum in conversation with our curator Betsy Johnson. The theme tonight is At Home on Art and Community, and the conversation that will follow will be a way for you all to understand this. Thank you, Aliza, for joining us. I'm very honored because we have recently acquired one of Aliza's remarkable paintings. It's called Mis Cuatro Gracias, and I'm sure you will be talking more about this piece with Betsy later. We are living through challenging times, and all the more so for museums. We live in the physical realm with objects that are works of art. Now in its fifth decade, the Hirshhorn nevertheless continues to exist beyond this challenge to our life as a place for objects. And we have turned to experiencing art online through various ways. You are certainly aware of Hirshhorn Inside Out. As the slides previously showed, we have a number of programs. We have the Maker's Morning for the kids and adults who play with works from our collection. We have our weekly conversations with artists, with our extraordinary team of curators. We have artist diaries who have been responding to the pandemic and the life that we are living through in challenging and mostly inspiring terms, and also video content from the archives of all the events and conversations and programs that we've had in the past. So I really invite you to join us on a weekly basis. We are live. We are bringing art to everyone's home in the best way we can, in the most inspiring way we can, and always with one guiding principle, that it be the artists' voices that we are here to gather around. Before we begin, I gratefully acknowledge the native peoples on whose ancestral homes we gather, as well as the diverse and vibrant native communities who make their home here today in DC and in the surrounding regions. Now, please enjoy today's discussion with Aliza Nisenbaum and Betsy Johnson.
Thank you, Stefan. Hello to all of you out there. We're glad to have you with us tonight, and we're very excited to have Aliza Nisenbaum here to discuss her practice. As many of you probably are aware, figurative painting is going through something of a revival at the moment, and Aliza Nisenbaum is part of a generation of painters who are re-engaging with the historic tradition of portraiture, specifically for her working with live models. She was born in Mexico City, and as a young adult, she was deeply interested in both art and social work, and she began her studies in Mexico in psychology. But soon after, she decided to go to Chicago with her mother, and she ended up earning a BFA and an MFA in painting from the School of the Art Institute in Chicago. She is based in New York City since 2008 and is a professor at Columbia University School of the Arts. In 2012, she began volunteering at Tania Bruguera's Immigrant Movement International, which led her back to figure painting after working abstractly for a number of years. She was included in the 2017 Whitney Biennial and had a solo exhibition that same year at the Minneapolis Institute of Arts in Minnesota. In 2019, she finished her largest painting to date, a mural depicting employees of the London Underground that was installed for 6 months at the Brixton Underground Station. And we're going to begin our program tonight with a short video clip documenting that project in London, after which Aliza will join me online to discuss her practice. So please enjoy this clip and we'll resume afterwards.
Brixton 02 to all radios, and this is a radio check over. We get different days, really. There was a day I spent 3 hours holding a customer's hand. She went into a panic attack. And as soon as I held her hand, she would not let go of my hand. 3 hours. And I was like, wow. Different days.
You must have so many stories like these.
Yes.
That's amazing.
Yes. Now I can't wait to retire.
My name's Aliza Nisenbaum, and I'm based in New York. Before that, I was in Chicago, and I was born in Mexico City. I've been in residence here in Brixton for like 2 months and a half now. I arrived in December, mid-December. Now it's almost spring, you know, it's the end of fall. It's been so interesting to work within the station itself. My studio is located in Brixton Station, which is like the hub where all of the Victoria line is operated from. For the past like 7 years or so, I've been painting portraits of people who I meet either through teaching or working in particular community centers, and mostly thinking about my painting practice as a way of documenting a particular community or family that I've worked with over an extended period of time. We sent out an email for anyone along the Victoria line who wanted to participate in this project and just asked them why. And we got back all kinds of fascinating answers about mentorship, people who were teachers, who were interested in the arts, who wanted to bring their families to see themselves represented in the station where they work. They came first for like a sitting where I posed them together. Like we did various different configurations just to see who was friends with each other or how they wanted to be depicted, and so this group wanted to be depicted together, and then I sketched it out just to get a sense of where everyone should sit, and then they always come and sit for me for anything from 3 to 5 hours. This is a practice that has been done for thousands of years, like people sitting for a painting from life. And I feel like that provides a very kind of intimate exchange between the artist and the sitter. And I'm really interested in the conversations and the kind of space that comes out of that. Every time I paint a portrait, it feels like I'm relearning it, and because it's like so complex to be sitting with somebody and how do you it's like a kind of like high order, how to translate their face and their skin and somehow their character into a painting. And I just get really fixated in the small passages of like different tones of skin, and thinking about like the temperature of different parts of the face, basically. And sometimes when I'm painting somebody, they'll be looking at themselves being painted and they'll be like, my face doesn't look like a patchwork like that, and then usually I put the eyes in or the mouth at the end, and then they're like, okay, that does look a lot like me, and oftentimes they're happy, but at the beginning there's a kind of questioning of whether they'll be satisfied with the result. But it's really fun to have them be the first witness.
That was the experience.
Lovely, lovely.
How do you feel?
Like a member of the royal family.
Oh, so nice.
Being painted. Well, it's been a nice experience.
Thank you so much for
It's
doing this.
been lovely working with you.
It was really fun painting you. Loved all your anecdotes.
So you are still going to be working here?
I'll be here for a month and a half.
Okay, all right. I'll be popping up since.
Please come
to
by.
see how it's going.
This evening, all the sitters are going to see the finished painting for the first time. So I'm so excited to see their responses. I hope I changed the tights on one of the women. I made them purple rather than black, so I hope she's okay with that. But this will be the unveiling party, which happens often with my work, where the first viewers are, the opening is for the sitters initially.
So good. Like, you can actually pick everyone out. It's really, really good.
My family are all from Brixton, so I thought it'd be quite fun, and my friends, to come through Brixton Street and think, is that her or? No, it is. Oh my God, for 6 months she's going to be looking down at us coming into the station.
It's beautiful. It's really great. And I like the idea that it looks as if we did it on the platform. That's fantastic. When I first did mine, because before she finished, she hadn't completed everything yet. So I was like, okay, what's it going to look like, Yes, but it's wonderful. I can't wait to see it out there.
The painting has been photographed and then printed on a vinyl, which has then been inserted on a massive kind of 9-meter wall at Brixton Station.
I think they just put it up yesterday at 4 a.m. I remember coming in here and painting till 4 a.m. when the whole station was closed. So it's amazing to see it finally printed.
It's vibrant, it's bright, it's great. And it's like a lot of the time underground staff people don't notice them. And now they've got bang, top of Brixton, there's your staff, that's what we're doing. And I love the colours and the different poses and people's expressions and even the uniform, we've got it all there, you know, yeah.
The whole composition is kind of your temporal experience of as you walk to the subway, you know, the Mind the Gap yellow line and then the gray marbled floor that when you enter the Victoria line. And then there's a selfie of myself in the mirror, one of those convex mirrors.
I've never been part of something this big before, so like to be part of TFL like this is nice.
It's like a family, you know, like a family portrait up there. That's what we're like. Beautiful, beautiful. I'm so proud. I'm so proud. And she has done a very beautiful work. It just shows the diversity in the workforce in Brixton and on the underground. And it shows that we take pride in what we do. And we are really proud to, you know, come out and let everybody see us as representing the face of TFL.
Okay, I think we're ready for Aliza to come on and join us now.
Hi, Betsy.
Hi.
Thank you, Stefan, for such a lovely introduction. It's great to be with all of you and all the people that tuned in for this talk.
We're so glad you're here with us. So one of the things that keeps striking me about that video is that it so nicely kind of summarizes so many of the important things about your practice in terms of your relationship with the sitter, the sort of community endeavor, your interest in depicting people who are sometimes kind of behind the scenes. And one of the things that I especially enjoy about that video is the image where you just see the large canvas and all of the faces, where that's as far as you've gotten. And you can see, as you described it so nicely, a sort of patchwork of colors that makes up each face. And I really love the way you said, you know, you're interested in the temperature of the parts of the face. And this is one of those things that that I first noticed about your painting, that faces are made up of such brilliant colors. And I'd love to hear you kind of talk about that and how you came to paint like that.
Thank you. Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I think color is like, it's my favorite part of painting in some ways, apart from the sitters being such an interesting part of such a crucial component of my work. The color, when you see someone from life and you look at their face, you know, especially when they're sitting right in front of you, you think about how color is very much like it's contingent on the color that's next to it. So, and we all perceive color differently, you know, and so like, how do you depict a kind of sparkle on somebody's nose, you know, or the way it protrudes, or how do you depict a shadow will depend on a color that's right next to it. And so before my sitters arrive to when we have a modeling session, I usually like get a cup of coffee and go into the studio and mix color for like an hour or so as a way of kind of getting myself geared up. And then when they come to sit for me, I'll kind of remix all my colors for another half hour as a way to kind of get them comfortable sitting there before I start to stare at them super intensely, you know, and it's a way to kind of lull them into the process or get them comfortable with sitting for a long period of time or chat them up a bit. And so I just think that color is just, it's almost as complex as identity is in some ways, because it's really like nobody is like just one color, you know, it's a very, very much of a mixture of how the light is hitting them or what the situation, or if they're blushing, you know, it's about proximity in some way, I guess. Yeah,
and you mentioned that that, you know, sometimes when people see their portrait as it's developing, they're a little stunned by this, and you know, maybe they might be shocked with some of the other liberties that you've taken. And I know that it's kind of an important part, or actually a very important part of your practice, that you solicit feedback, or at least you accept it and you hear it and you respond to it as as the depiction of a person develops. And I'm wondering if you have any stories about times where somebody felt really, really upset about a portrait, or maybe had some sort of feedback that you then decided to take into account in your final painting.
Let me think. I have so many stories I could go on like the entire time thinking about all these stories. But for example, I think, like with this one, the guy that's sitting here on the bottom right by the guy that's with his back on the chair, he didn't like that I had made his lips too pink, and he was like, I'm not wearing lipstick, and I was like, okay, I'll tone it down, you know, and it's interesting because my style, sometimes people know about the style in which I kind of paint people with this kind of faceting of color, and other times they like this kind of Renaissance way of thinking of skin as seamless, as like perfectly blended or something. And I have to tell them about, sometimes I tell them about like my influences, or I'll pick up a phone and kind of give them a little art history lesson in terms of what my references are and why I'm painting them in this way. And so I don't know, I've had kids take a sandwich to their mom while we're having a break. I've had people fall asleep while I'm painting them. I've had people watch horror films while I'm painting them, so that they're sometimes they'll be reading or they'll be watching something so that they don't get bored while I'm painting them. And so I'll be painting and they'll be like, ee, you know, like a murderer in the background where I'm watching a horror, they're watching a horror film. So there's just, it's so interesting. And there's also like this particular time was when Brexit was happening in England, and each one of the sitters told me their experience of who they voted for, you know, and it was interesting being so close to them. And I feel like it's a way of finding common ground, and even if you might have a different political opinion than somebody, when you see their kind of their body and their materiality and what a political situation might mean for them, you kind of come to an understanding because of this long, painting is a very slow process. It might take like 3 to 6 hours when I'm sitting with them. And so all kinds of interesting conversations transpire in that time.
And you can see in here that, I mean, we saw in the video clip that you paint with a single person, but then what you're creating here is a full group composition. So there's this interesting shift that happens in the creation of your painting, where you're working one-on-one, at least in the case of this work, but then you're somehow assembling a whole composition out of that. And in some ways it is slightly fictionalized, right? There is a construction of space that that didn't actually occur in real life, or a group situation. So can you speak a little to that, maybe in how you determined the composition of this particular painting?
Sure. I mean, the paintings in the end up being like a kind of confluence between figuration, abstraction, and observation, you know, that's why they start off with these kind of floating heads. First, I meet the people and I draw it out, and then they only sit for me for the painting of their face, you know, which kind of gives me a sense of like what I have to do for the rest of their clothes, or what pins they want to have included. Like one of them wanted baby on board to be on there, and all kinds of different pins that reflected their place of origin. And so once I've finished the painting of the portrait, then I really think about what does this group mean, you know, and think about like in some ways the history of group portraiture. Like with this one, I was thinking somewhat of the Night Watch, you know, of Rembrandt's, like the way he configured the figures. And I also think about the social relations between people when I decide on who to put next to each other. You know, when I meet them and first have like a coffee or something, who wants to be sitting next to each other, who's interested in fashion, all kinds of different concerns come into it. And so this painting was also like, as I explained in the video, it's kind of like your temporal experience of getting onto the tube station, so onto the Victoria line. And the Brixton station was like the hub of the Victoria line. So my studio was located in the back of the Brixton station. And so the subjects in this painting saw the painting being made over the 3 months that I was painting it. You know, there was glass walls. The public couldn't see it, but the people that worked behind the scenes in the station could see it come about. And so, like, there's the tiles from Brixton. Then I went to the Transport Museum and I investigated the kind of textiles that go into the history of the Victoria line. Like, the textile on the left is a historic one, and the one on the right is the current textile in the back of the seats of that particular subway line. Then I was thinking of the Mind the Gap yellow line and their uniforms, of course. And then as you walk through the hallways of those subway stations, the metro stations, as they call them in England, and in Mexico too, actually, there's these convex mirrors. And when I used to go to London to visit the National Gallery, I love the Arnolfini portrait by Van Eyck. And it's a painting of a convex marriage. A lot of you must know of this painting. And so I did like a selfie kind of nod to the Arnolfini wedding. And so, yes, so you're right. There's a kind of montage of various different temporal moments and fictions and kind of invention that comes into the making of the work.
Yeah, if we go to the next slide, we'll see that self-portrait, I think, a little more closely. There you go. And I have to say, I think about the Arnolfini double portrait, the wedding portrait, every time I see that. And there are these layers. I think that's one of the most fascinating parts of your painting, and the reason why it's possible to stand in front of your painting for a really long time, because the more you look, the more you kind of discover all of these different layers. And we'll see that in more paintings as we keep going. And I think if we go to the next slide, there's an interesting thing here. I guess we see it right here, that you often paint multiple portraits of a single person. And I believe that's what's happening with this one. Is that correct?
No, this was a woman that I was going to fit her into the other painting, but she was almost 8 months pregnant with triplets. And so she couldn't make it to the sittings for the first one. So I decided to paint her by herself. There was an exhibition at the Transport Museum during the time of posters, historic posters, done for the art on the underground for the past 100 years by women. And so I paired her with all these historic posters. Like, there was really interesting ones of like the Blitz, you know, during the Blitz in England, wear white, you know, and so I decided to paint her with the history of the kind of art that's been made for the art on the underground for the past 100 years. So she is not one of the people I've painted multiple times, but I think we'll get to some of those later on.
We definitely will. But I love all of the ephemera that you've kind of repainted. You've actually made it much more permanent than I suppose it is in its original iteration there in the background behind her. But if we go to the next slide, I think, you know, we've been talking a lot about your practice kind of in more recent years, but what I want to do now is kind of pull back a bit to your work in 2012 with Tania Bruguera's Immigrant Movement International, and kind of discuss how you came to actually depict many of your students and families there in portraiture. So, and that's really, I think, some of the first work that we really became aware of was your images of immigrant communities that you did starting back in 2012. So can you explain kind of how you became involved with Tania and her project?
Of course. Well, yes, I was just very inspired by this community center that she started that was called Immigrant Movement International. And so I told her, how can I participate? I'd love to be a part of this somehow. And so she told me what we most need is English language skills for this mostly Mexican and Central American population that lived in Corona and Queens. And so I said, why don't I teach an English translating text from Spanish into English through feminist art history. I just came up with that class, and I was like, I really want to engage with a group of women. And so I taught this group of women for one semester, and I would take them to the Met, and it was kind of like a class that became a model for other teaching that I've done later afterwards, but it was very kind of not top down, the pedagogy was started from them, like from paintings that they were interested in. So we would translate like text by Mary Cassatt or things that Frida Kahlo would say, or the different artists, and so after that class, I was just very inspired by the stories I heard from some of these women. So I asked Tania, would it be okay if I just painted some of their portraits in this community center itself? And so it's the first time that I really worked in a public setting. I was painting is such a private thing sometimes, and so it was an interesting confluence where I had a kind of art studio in the corner of the gallery, and there'd be lawyers coming in and teach and giving seminars, or there would be DACA classes also, or OSHA instruction, and so it became like a kind of mixture of pedagogy where I'd be painting somebody, like this is Veronica, my first sitter, who I had a very long relationship with, that continues. And their kids would come and join and ask me about color. And so after this class, after this kind of way of working publicly, I started to use kind of painting as a way to engage with various different communities, and as a way of kind of having this medium be a way to access sharing of resources and pedagogy with various different communities that I've worked with since. That was long-winded, sorry, but anyway, just a way of saying that this was a way of kind of starting, and it was just so satisfying to get out of my comfort zone and have painting in a social space.
Well, and you talk, we've spoken about that sort of discomfort of painting a person, that that prolonged sitting and looking at somebody else, and I suppose that would have a different sort of twist to it when you're doing it in a public space as well. Did you find that increased the discomfort, or was that something that you found to be a learning tool or helpful to your practice?
Yes, it becomes kind of performative, and it becomes like, I mean, it's always, for me, I don't know when I'll get rid of that uncomfortableness of painting somebody from life, because you have their body there and they get tired, and you have to act quickly. But it's also kind of what inspires me and kind of what makes me, I guess it's what gives me energy, so it's what gets it outside of my area of comfort, but also what makes me kind of really push it in some ways. So what was your question? I guess
I think you answered it. And I think if we move to the next slide now, we are now seeing a family that you have become quite close with over the years and have painted a number of times. This is a father and daughter reading the newspaper. And when you've described this to me before, you've spoken about how you're painting the experience of being with these people, and I think that's a really interesting thing, because you're not just trying to get their likeness, but you're also capturing something that's a little bit more ephemeral, a little bit more difficult to pin down. But where do you see that entering in? How do you layer that into your paintings, and maybe into this one in particular?
I guess, yes, I guess I was thinking a few things that I forgot to say for the last question. I guess for such a long time, I was interested in ethics and in social work, and when I was a kid in Mexico studying psychology. And so, like, there was this one philosopher, Manuel Levinas, that I loved that I'm still really interested in, that says that all ethics comes from like the face-to-face relationship, because like another person is like one phenomena that you can't ever fully understand its interiority, so therefore it elicits like an ethical demand. And there was always artists such as like Tania Bruguera and Greg Bordowitz, who was my professor at the Art Institute of Chicago, that would make work that was about kind of working in this public sphere, you know, socially engaged work. Anyway, so it was interesting for me to be able to bring painting and that together. But going back to this work, this is called La Talaverita, Sunday Morning New York Times, and this is the other side of the family. Veronica, Marisa, and Gustavo, who I've been painting Marisa since the age of like 10 or 12, and I think it was 12, and now she's in college, and so I've seen her grow up, and this was once that they invited me to their home to have Sunday brunch, and I was thinking about the kind of heritage that they come from. These are a craft tradition from Puebla in Mexico, where they're from. So oftentimes my paintings are this kind of confluence of like pointing to the character of a person or the craft tradition where they come from. And you know, it's like their contingent situation, the New York Times, and the place where they left almost 20 years ago. Gustavo and Veronica.
And this is the same family that you had paintings of them that were included in the 2017 Whitney Biennial.
Yeah.
And so I think if we go to the next slide, we see them in their home, and you're there with paintings. I think that you did of them. Some of the first paintings were up on the wall.
Yeah, exactly. That's the first painting I did of Veronica on the left, and the next one on the right of Marisa.
Mm-hmm. And if we go to the next one, you see them in the exhibition at the Whitney, and I believe that you involved them in the programming as well. Can you?
Yeah, Veronica was she's a community leader herself. You know, she leads a group of women through like these bike tours through Queens, and so I thought I would include her in the Whitney programming, and she gave a tour to youth, and we both kind of led the tour, and she was talking about the work she does. And Marisa is also very interested in social justice. But if we even, I mean, do you want to turn back to the last slide, to the one before this for a second? I asked Vero if she would be interested in making this public just the other day, and she said she was, you know, and obviously, like through this pandemic, immigrant populations have not had relief. You know, they haven't been getting the $600 checks a month, and so it was interesting to think of like this circle of me giving them these paintings early on, and when they were experiencing hardship recently, a lot of hardship with not being able to work. My gallery, I was very proud of them. They stepped up and were able to purchase these paintings for you know, a seller later on. So we were able to include them in the kind of profit sharing and the economy of my works as well. So I'm interested in how to think about like different economies that occur with my sitters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I you know, that's something that's incredibly interesting about your practice, is that, you know, you're looking outside of the capitalist economy, and you're looking at these economies of care, and you always compensate your sitters, but I know that we've talked about it, the compensation tends to take different forms depending on the project.
Yeah,
I don't know if you want to speak about that.
Yeah, depending on what seems fair for after a conversation with the sitters, and what kind of involvement they think they want to participate in. And so this is a family I've worked with for quite a while. There's always like an hourly rate I pay my sitters, but I'm also really interested in different economies that might escape this kind of instrumentalized like one-to-one paying for time, you know, and how we can kind of create different sharing of resources, whether it might be that I might help someone with college entrance applications, or just something else, and how I might be involved with people's lives over time when I paint sitters, especially repeatedly.
Yeah, that very famous saying, "It takes a village," kind of strikes me when you talk like that. And and I think it's so interesting that your practice is structured around the idea of building these communities and building these relationships. And it seems very connected to your interest in Levinas, in his face-to-face, in this idea that when we spend time face-to-face with one another, that binds us to one another, and we develop a sense of responsibility for each other's well-being through that. And so I think it's a really special part of what you're doing as a painter and the way you're living in the world.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm currently working on this project with Tate Liverpool, with NHS workers, and so this is the first time, we'll get to this later, but I'm working remotely and having Zoom meetings with NHS workers from the healthcare system in England. And so it's been quite interesting to talk to them and to think about this upcoming project.
Yeah. That must be pretty different for you, because you typically have always worked face to face, right? And so it's going to be
go ahead.
Be a different sort of situation. I mean, I feel it right now. Usually when I have these sorts of conversations with people, I'm face to face with them. And so when you have the internet in between, it definitely creates a different sort of dynamic to work within.
For sure, but I think you were the one that told me, I mean, it's interesting how Zoom does let you kind of have some physical cues of people's bodies and stuff. So who knows what possibilities it's going to open up in terms of the way we engage with people we can't have proximity to.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see what happens for you with that. So I think if we go maybe 2 slides forward, we come to these images. You know, you were speaking earlier about the way that when you're working with your sitters, and if they have any sort of questions about why you're painting in specific ways, you bring out sometimes art historical references that help. So I imagine that these are probably 2 artists that sometimes come up in those discussions. Is that?
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. Do you want to speak about what it is that that spoke to you in their work?
I mean, like the muralists in Mexico, I grew up with these amazing, imposing murals that really depicted kind of the movement of social history, you know, and they're like massive confluences of group portraits, obviously so complex and so impressive. And in some ways, like Alice Neal is another influence for me. The way she would paint people from life in Harlem, which is actually where I live in New York. And she would always sit face to face with people. And so I'm super interested in the feminist notion of how the private is political as well, and how like this kind of looking at somebody from life or from, you know, in particular individuals rather than kind of a massive grouping of people is an extremely political thing as well, or you know, non-political is just a very wonderful exchange, you know, where you don't necessarily know the political consequences, but you know what happens in that one exchange and the ramifications you can't be responsible for, obviously. So anyway, Alice Neal and even painters like Yuan Uglo were important to me, or people like Greg Bordowitz, who was my professor in Chicago, and he was part of ACT UP. And I remember he would always talk about what are the power relationships in this room right now? You know, how the kind of micro politics that occur in any kind of power relationship in various different conversations or social dynamics. So anyway, those are some of my influences.
I think if we go to the next slide, we'll see another image that you did based on a work by Sylvia Slay.
Yeah, this was I was in residence with the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs under Obama, and I made this painting of all the women in that residency, and I was thinking of this painting by Sylvia Slay of a group of women also that were, you know, I think it was the AIR reading group, and so I pose these women with a historical image as well, which I think if you go to the next slide, maybe you might be able to see. Well, that's a self-portrait of myself. It's called the Sindicato de Costureras, which means the Union of Seamstresses.
But that image was in the background of the last photo, and it comes from this, and it comes from the woodblock print. There you go. And this is a protest image?
Yes, obviously Mexico has such a long history of kind of political posters. This was a very famous one, or I don't know how famous, but Rafael Lopez Vasquez from the 1938 lecture book for Workers' Night School. So I decided to, it's women marching in solidarity for their union rights.
And I think this, it's interesting to me what you said earlier about, I mean, you were kind of speaking around it, but the personal being political in a way too. And if we go, I think to the slide after, we see here, I believe this is one of the women who was in that group photo or that group painting.
Yeah.
But now here you're showing her at home, but she's reading a newspaper with the headline, "Resistance Begins at Home," I believe. Is that true? Yeah. So I think that's an interesting dynamic of your portraiture here too, is that you're showing her kind of in her more political group formations in the first image, but now you're showing a more personal, intimate look at her at home. Why is it that you feel like both are necessary, or that you want to do both?
Well, it's like the private sphere is in a way a place where the public kind of, it's a place away from institutions that might want to try to govern your life in some ways. So it's a place where people go to recharge in some ways. This is Kehan, who was the organizer of those women for the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, and she's also a Theater for the Oppressed facilitator. And so I was just really interested in her domestic space, and I find myself wanting to go deeper into the lives of some of the people that I first meet in these group formations. And sometimes I get an invitation to go to their homes and see the kind of art that they surround themselves with, or the textiles, and surround them with their own belongings, to give them a sense of a wider sense of their personality. I also love like the intimist painters, Bonnard and Bouillard, and the way they would kind of envelop their subjects with textiles and with patterns. It's a way of kind of filling the space, or in some ways like embracing them. And I grew up with, a household and a mother that would wear lots of patterns and colors. So it's kind of natural to have that in my work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think if we go to the next slide, I think we see that in this next one as well.
Oh yeah.
All the layers of color and flowers.
This was oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Yeah.
This was part of a series of works that I did when I had that show at the Minneapolis Institute of Art. And these were a group of women who tended to a teaching garden at Hope Community Garden. And we made, another important part of my work is that we're making like short little films of each group I work with, so that their voice is shown alongside the work, and oftentimes if it's like a community center such as Hope, we can give them a video separate of my work to kind of help promote their community center. So this was a teaching garden, and they had a poster that had welcome in like English, Somali, and Spanish. And if you tended to the garden over the year, then you could make use of the crops to cook for yourself and such. And one of the young women was kind of like she watched me paint, and she was interested in becoming an artist at a certain point. So, but I think she decided to go for psychology herself. So anyway.
Well, and what strikes me here, and I think in some ways we see it in the next painting, which is the one that's entering the Hirshhorn collection. But you do have an interest in thinking about where people gather and how they gather, and thinking about the sort of group formations, and that the activity and the learning that occurs with that. And I think I've heard you reference Fred Moten's his idea of rethinking modes of assembly, you know, his idea of, you know, education occurs not just in the classroom, but it occurs in all of these other spheres. And so I think that, to me, seems like one of the really interesting things is that you've started looking at other communities, such as here, salsa dancing community that you're a part of. And so do you want to speak about what this is a painting of? I think these are 4 of your friends.
Yeah, this is Camilo and I, who's in the green shirt, went salsa dancing. I mean, I've been going dancing since I was younger in Mexico, but we decided, he told me of this wonderful quote by Alice Walker, "Hard times require furious dancing." And so we were like, in the age of Trump, we need to go dancing every week. And so, and so we'd go to this one club downtown that had this particular mural in the background, and the one that's behind the dancers. And I decided to incorporate it, and it's called Mis Cuatro Gracias, as a reference, my 4 graces, as a reference to the Botticelli, you know, graces who are inspiring art and beauty and grace. And they're all artists and friends, and they're really obviously very inspiring to me, so I decided to paint them. They really took off on the poses when they came to sit for me. So they were all into this modeling like this.
Well, and you've mentioned an interest in choreography, right?
Yeah.
That's something that you've been thinking about.
Yeah, well, you said
through choreography.
Exactly, and Fred Moten. I mean, it's interesting to think about his ideas and to rethinking modes of assembly. You know, how each of the groups I paint have particular kind of confluences of the way they have their kind of casual economies. You know, like one group of undocumented women would have a cooperacha, which is like a casual banking system where each woman puts a little bit of money in each week, and then if somebody needs it, they take it out, you know, or like if we go to the next slides, I don't know if we need to go a little faster because we're, if we go to some of the next slides like these, I painted the whole gallery at Anton Kern at the gallery where this work was shown, and it was very interesting to see how it's a very non-hierarchical gallery in terms of the way they organize their workforce. So I love thinking about how different workforces assemble and the kind of power dynamics within them, and try to represent them in some ways. So there was also paintings of some of my favorite, some of the artists in the gallery. I couldn't include them. I love so many of them. But anyway, I try to make copies of some of the painters that show at the gallery itself, and show, like, you know, from the owner to the cleaning staff to all the directors who work at the gallery.
Yeah, and you see that in the next slide, which is the security staff at the Minneapolis Institute of Art, where you had a solo show.
Yeah.
Really beautiful little repaintings of paintings in the background.
Yeah, well, it was so much fun to be included. They let me into the museum before it would open, when the guards would have their security briefing, and it would happen in this lounge where they each had a picture of them with their pets, and it was called the Pet Lounge. And so since it was Minneapolis, one person had like a pet cow. But anyway, so I painted them with their with the background of that lounge, and we made a video of a lot of the guards were actually artists themselves. So I got to see some of the workings of the museum where the show was exhibited.
Mm-hmm. So I think we can maybe wrap up with a quick conversation about, you know, what do you do when you can't paint a person face to face? And if we go, that next slide is a good place to start this. This is something that you had done back in 2016, where you didn't have access to the person who you were painting a portrait of, and instead you painted a portrait of the correspondence, right? Do you want to speak about this?
This was a correspondence I had over 2 years with a woman I'm very close to, that would send me her letters and I would transcribe them. And she would mail them to me from the correctional institution and I would redraw them.
There seems to be something so intimate about that act of kind of tracing or picturing something that somebody has created with their hands for you. Did that feel akin to making a portrait?
Definitely. I mean, I've also kind of retranscribed weavings that people do, and you know, I tried to make the text non-legible, so because it was a private correspondence, but it showed like all the kind of the whole year, you know, like Christmas, New Year's, and it was just interesting to see the inner workings of a correctional institution through this correspondence, because as a lot of us know, the immigration system in this country is like you know, it's like a straight line to the carceral state that we live in as well. It's one of the same system, and it was just very interesting to see how she would make portraits of people in this space and then send them to me, and so it was kind of inspiring each other.
And did that in some ways inspire the painting that you turned to as you found that you came to be sheltering in place during this time?
Let me catch a glass of water. Can we turn to the next slide? Yeah, definitely. This was, I think this is the last image that we have, and during this quarantine period, I was just kind of, I don't know, thinking of sitters that I've painted over the years and thinking about them, some of them in Queens, others like former students of mine. And so I started to paint much more abstractly or from photographs and go on these walks. I'm in Los Angeles during quarantine, even though I usually am in New York, and I would take these afternoon walks and just kind of reflect on what's going on, and then in a way kind of send my people flowers in some ways. So I'm going to have a show at Anton's at Anton Kern Gallery in the fall, in September, which are like these diptychs of people I've painted in the past that now I paint from memory or from photographs, paired with flowers that I find in my walks in Los Angeles.
Yeah, that's really sweet.
I also, it's amazing how much like comfort, so many people started to paint flowers during quarantine, but it's amazing how much comfort one is finding in nature now. I think, you know, it's like taking walks and finding flowers. Some of the ones which I hadn't seen since I left Mexico, very similar vegetation here in LA, and it would be kind of like a renewing force, I think.
Yeah, and well, and your mother, didn't your mother teach you how to paint, and weren't you painting a lot of flowers?
She was a flower painter when I was growing up, so we would have critiques of the flower paintings when you know, evening dinner with flower painting critiques. So yes, so it's a way of thinking of like gift giving and also thinking of matrilinear lineages, you know.
Mm-hmm. And I think we might have one more slide that shows the original portraits that you made of Atencio.
Oh yes, Atencio.
Yeah, sorry.
I painted first. That's okay. On the left, and then and I painted stubble in that one painting, and he wasn't happy that I painted him that way, so he came back the next day with his ostrich leather boots and belt, and would rather be depicted with those rather than with the stubble. So. So yes, this is revisiting that painting many years after.
Yeah. Well, I think, do you want to share anything about your upcoming project that you mentioned earlier quickly before we go to Q&A? Or should we just?
I think we could just go. It's a painting I'm making of almost 24 healthcare workers that have been working during the coronavirus in Liverpool, which I was supposed to do on site, and I can't because I don't want to travel. Although I don't want to take such a long flight, and you know, then I'll have to be quarantined there, and I don't think you can even leave as an American. But anyway, so it's a project of portraits of them, and and it's unfolding. I'm just starting it, but I'd love to hear questions.
Yeah, so I think we have received a few questions, and anybody who wants to submit a question for us at this point in time can do so through the Q&A. And I think, let's see.
Should I choose them or you?
Well, you know, I think either of us can choose them if you see one you would like.
This is a good one from Carol Becker, Dean of Columbia School of the Arts, which is really great to see that she's there. She's asking, what's the mural behind that I'm sitting, you know, this virtual background. This is actually a mural that Maria Izquierdo was supposed to have executed. And in the, I think it was the 40s. I don't know the exact year, but the muralist Diego Rivera was her teacher in San Carlos when she was coming into being, you know, and he was her strong supporter. But then when the Vasconcelos, during the program of muralism in Mexico, when they actually were about to commission her to do this, some of those macho policies, some of those muralists were like, no, she can only do easel painting, so she can't make this mural. So anyway, this is like just an interesting painting that I keep in mind for, like, you know, female potential of painting or something.
And now it's become a mural in your virtual reality right now. It's definitely managed to fulfill its destiny.
Let's see.
There's a question from Arlene Plangen that says, in the last portrait of the young man who didn't like his portrait and came back, is that you on the lower left in the portrait? Did you include an image of yourself in that one?
No, I don't think so. That's me. Oh, actually, it's a photograph. That's a photograph, and I'm painting him there. Maybe they just got confused.
Oh, right.
So it's just me sitting with him, you know, painting him.
Maybe if we bring it back up. Oh, yeah, you can see. Yeah. Oh, yeah, it seems to be that there's somebody else.
Girl. Oh, there's a little girl in the background going by.
Part of the sitting process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see.
I have a good one from Jamin An. Your paintings and the work's commitment to forging relationships with sitters, familiar and new, has imaginative, hopeful, future-oriented potential. Could they also index loss? How might they register something compensatory? How do you confront the ways the paintings can perhaps obscure misrecognitions despite their ambitions for recognition? It's a complicated question.
It's a complicated one. Well, you know, yes, of course. I think there's such a lack of recognition for certain people in our society that, that I can only do my part. You know, I can only do what I can through my voice and through my experience in painting. Future, I'm trying to decipher that complicated question. Do they index loss? They do index loss. Oftentimes the sitters are kind of absorbed in themselves, or kind of, sometimes people have told me that they look a little melancholic or something, but I like them. I like to make paintings of people when they're absorbed in their own thought and not engaged, sometimes not engaging with the viewer, or totally in a space that's purely their own, you know, where it's autonomous in some ways and I have a small view of them.
You know, I think another thing that's interesting to me thinking through this question, I'm not sure if this is what Jamin was intending or if this is what he's referring to, but, you know, many of the first paintings of yours that attracted widespread attention were your paintings of immigrant communities, largely because of the immigration crisis that was unfolding. Although your portraits of immigrant communities began back in 2012 with your work with Tania, and it was kind of more recently that you started to get attention for that. And many of the people who were writing about them wrote about them as an attempt to give visibility to people who lack visibility. Mm-hmm. But I think, you know, one of the things I have noticed upon speaking to you further about this is that it seems you know, even though you are depicting people behind the scenes, like let's say the Anton Kern Gallery staff or the Minneapolis Institute of Art security officers, you seem less focused on kind of elevating them through giving them visibility than on really just kind of understanding who they are as individuals and wanting to understand the way they're organizing, the way their lives are structured, the way the work environment is structuring them. And so I think that there's an interesting dynamic at play there where you're not necessarily trying to rescue somebody from invisibility.
No, that's very nicely put. Yes, I think it can be, I mean, you know, oftentimes I paint people that don't, you know, look like me. I'm a white Mexican, but I think many people can have solidarity with each other, you know, with people that might not be exactly your own ethnic background. And I think of them more in about the slowness of painting and paying attention, and this kind of being in proximity with them, you know, in some ways it's my paintings are a confluence of like reciprocity and exchange and time spent with somebody with that slow technology of painting, you know, and it's not necessarily, there are very cliched images of immigrants in the media that's maybe painting a portrait of immigrants as like runners in a marathon is something you don't actually see that much. And I try to get deep into their lives so that I get to show the complexity of their lives. But it's too much for one. I don't presume to be able to give anyone, like, I don't know if I can give anyone a voice, you know, if I can facilitate a platform that they might not have, or within the history of representation, you know, like the history of Mexican images that enter a museum, then that's powerful, like the symbolic register of that, I think, also apart from the sitters, you know, and what gets shown in museums. But I think you put it well with your question, with your...
Well, and one of the other things that just struck me as you were speaking is there's also this really striking quality of mutual vulnerability that happens in your sittings. You know, when we were talking about earlier with discomfort, one of the things I recognized immediately about you is that you're not just asking people to kind of bare themselves to you, but you're also very open with sharing stories about your life and you know, in essence, sharing your life with others through this portraiture practice. And I think there is this sort of strength and resistance and vulnerability that isn't so immediately obvious, but it definitely resonates in your practice.
Thank you.
Let's see if there's another one.
Let's see.
There's so many.
How do I decide which colors to use on different parts of the face? Light green as opposed to maybe purple or other colors? I change it so much. I think it's like, it's really the colors that they come from light. I mean, if you try to think about how do you interpret like the nice light that's hitting Betsy's cheeks right now, you know, sorry, not to give everyone a feeding, but you know, it's you know, like it's a bright yellow and a pink and a bright blue here. It's like, how do you make light visible, which is, it's just a matter of thinking of cool and warm, you know, like what color is warm and what color is in shadow. So then there's certain colors that are in the shadow range and others that are in the warm range, basically.
Yeah. I see a question here from Anna DeHaro. Do you ever paint in your studio, or is it usually on site?
No, I do lots of painting in my studio. The sitters now, since my paintings are large, they come to my studio. I do a lot of kind of site studies and photographs in the particular place, and then they come to my studio, and then I go back to, so it's like both going on site and a lot of like the things I used to do when I was an abstract painter, standing down sometimes and making abstract moves that are about interpretation in some ways. Here's another question, or if they pose in parts or together. They're all each one by one. They never pose together. You know, I paint them person by person.
Mm-hmm. I like this one above it too, saying you mentioned that your work relates to a history of portraiture. However, you place a lot of meaning and detail in your background, which breaks the hierarchy of foreground and background. So she was wondering if you could speak about this. This is from Julieta Beltran.
Yeah, yeah. I was like an abstract painter for almost like 10 years or something, and I'm really not so interested in kind of traditional, you know, portraiture that's very stiff or something. I like it when it gets confusing and in some ways full, with the background being. I'm interested in really interested in abstraction and color, you know, in particular, not so much in, I mean, I'm interested in portraiture, but I'm interested also in like the history of good painting, I guess, or something.
Yeah, it seems that you're pulling together not just things that we would typically consider portraits, but references to other sorts of community paintings, you know, other larger group gatherings too.
Or even like the history, like I love Barnett Newman and the way he talks of the zips in his paintings being about this, like the relationship between a person and the verticality of another, you know, so it's, I love like abstraction, and my painting is very much brings, like, I love Morris Lewis, I love like so many abstract painters.
Well, and you spent, you know, a long period, I don't know how long it was exactly, maybe 10 years painting abstractly. Is that correct? You feel that you draw on that in your current practice? Is that something that you notice kind of coming in?
I was really interested when I was an abstract painter in Lucy Rigarai, this person that talks about tactility and how touch is a way of always being in relation. So I would try to make these huge abstract paintings, like kind of from the history of the things that Helen Frankenthaler and before the ABEX people talked about, making an intimate environment through these large fields of color. You know, the Washington DC history of like Morris Lewis and those color field painters, you know, this idea of making Irigaray talked about touch being about being in relationships. So in some ways it was also about ethics, but through color and through materiality and through tactility.
Well, as you talk about that, I'm remembering, you know, how you explained the skin tone and the patchwork of colors, and how different colors kind of juxtaposed against each other create, you know, a sort of vibrancy, or, you know, a vibration. And I think that maybe perhaps also speaks to this background you have in abstract painting and thinking about color in that way as well, I would imagine.
Yeah, totally.
You know, I see there's this one comment, and I suppose we could wrap with a comment instead of a question, if you feel like you're ready to wrap.
Yes.
But Arlene Palangan said, your work seems to me to give your subjects value for themselves, and perhaps how they might view themselves in the future, which they may never have thought of in relation to themselves. To me, you are giving them value they may never have considered. I thought that
well, they do that to me as well. I mean, that's such a nice comment. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight, Aliza.
Thank you. Thank you for everyone who tuned in from all over. I really appreciate this, Betsy, and I really appreciate having this platform of the Hirshhorn.
Yeah, and to all of you who did tune in, you might want to go over onto our website again if you haven't already. We do have an Artists in Quarantine series that we've been doing during the pandemic, where we've been soliciting, I guess you could call them video diaries from artists documenting what they are doing right now. And Aliza was kind enough to contribute to that series, so you can see her there, as well as many other artists who have been sharing with us what they are thinking and working on right now. Thanks again to all of you tonight. Thank you, Aliza. This has been a lovely evening.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.